get cracking on what right looks like, what we've learned over the past 5 years since PASPA was repealed on the media and sports betting operators relationship. So I'm gonna kick it over to Brian to let him introduce himself.
Sure, Brian Egger, gaming analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence in New York.
Hi, I'm Cosmina Schulman. I'm with NESN, New England Sports Network. I'm located in Boston, Mass, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategic Partnerships.
Reid, Rooney, a founder and CEO of Betsperts Group. We have 6 brands under us and based in Chicago.
And Tom Marimber, based out of New Jersey, Optimove Director for Gaming. I head all of our gaming vertical for Optimove, if you will.
Thanks, Tomer. Okay, so I'm gonna kick it over to Brian. I'm gonna ask Brian, can you maybe just give us, from your perspective, what have you seen over the past 3, 4, 5 years from that, specifically in those relationships between the medias and the media companies and the operators, and just maybe some successes that you've seen out there in the past few years.
Sure, I think we've seen a number of attempts to try to approach the idea of having this convergence among media, betting, other types of verticals. And so you have had some that have been quite successful. Bally's, Sinclair comes to mind. You've got a couple of cases here where we're trying to figure out what's going to happen, for example, with FanDuel TV. You've had other cases too where others have tried to have a start and got into the space, and Fubo TV, for example, Fubo Sportsbook, they kind of retrenched from that. So we've seen a number of different moves here, but we still have a couple of open question marks about others that haven't so-called found their dance partners, so to speak. Wondering what's going to happen.
Who are those?
ESPN is an obvious one, and the question is, who would that make sense with? Is it a licensing opportunity? But there's a pretty broad canvas of that people have already picked spots on.
Right on. And so, yeah, Cosmina, let's talk a little bit about Massachusetts and NESN. Speaking of dance partners, how are you all approaching the relationship with sportsbooks?
Sure.
And for those that might not know, Massachusetts is soon to go live, so maybe just give us a little bit of color, and then I'm going to also ask you about some of the recent discussions that have happened specific to Massachusetts around the media relationships.
Sure, of course. So I think it's interesting when you're in partnerships, right? It's like, what does that really mean? Who's giving who the money? And I think partnerships we use really loosely, unfortunately, in this category. And at NESN, we've really tried to understand what the heck do these sports operators want? What is important to them? How are they going to stay successful long term? And really, what can we learn from them? So I think, even in just some of the examples that you gave, I think that this was just transactions, right? A partnership. Hey, let me sponsor your pregame show. Hey, let me do that. No one actually, in my opinion, stopped, took a step back, and said, what do they really want? What can I learn from this industry? Because to be really honest, what the sports operators want, it's not that different than what the rest of our consumers want.
Right.
So I think that NESN was really intentional. When we went to market, we hired a sports betting consultant. We really asked that question. We partnered with Chalkline. We built out our first-party data. We talked about segmenting our audiences. We really started to understand, okay, if somebody plays free-to-play, how likely are they to place a bet? 70% of people who place a bet watch the game live, which is why all those partnerships you just mentioned are so important in this space. So, yeah, we're really excited. Massachusetts went live a couple weeks ago with brick and mortar. We're in the place now where actually this Friday, mobile betting will start. NESN will play in a couple different places. We'll play in the sponsorship place, but we'll also play in the affiliate bounty space as well, which I think a lot of media companies still haven't quite figured out.
Yeah.
And then we'll also play in the content space. We've built out a whole sports betting team. We've hired separate analysts, which not a lot of companies are doing. They're using their same play-by-play guy for sports betting. So I do think that our approach and how we've just approached partnership has been really intentional and strategic. Nice.
And then Reid, just on the affiliate side, maybe give us some flavor about what the sports book and the affiliate relationship has looked like maybe over the past couple of years, and maybe some highlights, good and bad.
Yeah, I think the last couple of years is very different than the last 2 months, to say the least, and what 2023 will look like. I think the best comparison might be, think of like a gold rush back in the day. Everyone went in to try and get the one big nugget, right? And some companies and some groups are building mines to go find gold, if that makes sense. But from our side, it's state launches, it's events, big major events, football season, March Madness, Masters, all that. That's all wonderful, but how are you creating a business relationship with the operators that is long-term? And how are you bringing that profitability that you're going to hear over and over and over again from all the operators moving forward? How are you bringing them the quality of customers? And I know you're going to talk some about retention, but how are you getting them back into the ecosystem after you've already sent them? And what is the value? And I don't think many of the operators have figured that out just yet, or which partners are best at that. But what is the value of bringing someone back or switching them from one of the other operators that they're using? So I think the next year and a half, 2 years is going to be much more strategic in partnerships and opportunities. But you have to bring the high quality players, not just around the events or the state launches, which are still fun gold rushes at this time. But I think it's the long-term value that they're really looking for.
So Tomer, let's talk a little bit about this elusive sports bettor. What are they actually looking for? And how can, if you're providing that individual perspective, how can the media companies kind of assist the books in acquiring those customers? Like, what are they looking for? Whether are they casual, are they sophisticated, are they looking for certain types of content? Just give us some thoughts on the actual sports bettor.
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting year in that regard. I think that with the whole transition towards profitability and for the operators to stop the burn and start kind of like proving the model that it's working, it's been a very, very interesting year. And when you look into the US, it's not really one entity, it's state-by-state situation, right? I think that certain states are very mature and I think provide good opportunity for operators to actually turn profit, whereas other states are still going to be challenging in terms of getting to that profitability area, if you will, right? And if you're an operator, it's very tough as well. Like, how do you balance between the expense that makes you not profitable because you have to grow to new states, right? Mass is the new that's coming up versus, showing the markets you can make this is actually working, this model is working, and so on and so forth. And what I find interesting, you asked about the player behavior. From what I'm hearing, a lot of the operators, when they thought about that, they first thought about product. What can I do with my product? How can I make it more slick, better, easier, faster? KYC, right? I saw one of our customers takes them 44 seconds to get KYC done for players.
That's
amazing. In the
lightning
US,
fast. Yes,
like
lightning
Social
fast.
Security and all that, 40 seconds. You get KYC and start rolling, right? So there's a lot of improvements on the products. And I think now we're at a point where how much product can you sell to a player? It's also reaching its kind of like limits.
Sure.
And so we're starting to see more investment towards real marketing retention and more sophistication, looking into the average revenue per user that you get.
Yes.
And if the tier one operators in the US can get $1,500 ARPU from their players and a small startup is getting half of it, that's a problem. So you have to look for your niche. You have to look for your kind of like, where do you attack that partnership? What do you think about the content? How do you think about, the angle you're going to do that in order to obviously win the competition? So
you bring up a really interesting point around unit economics. And so, when an operator, comes to a media company, they obviously are, ultimately they're trying to acquire customers. I mean, this is what they're doing. And so, Brian, can you maybe just talk a little bit about, some of those, from a grand scale, if I am acquiring customers at $1,500 a person, which is a lot of money to spend. I need them to earn, I need, at least $1,500 to break even on those players. Maybe just talk a little bit about how this all scales in that relationship with the media company, and maybe how that can benefit an operator, or with some of the deals that we've seen out there. There's recently there was a media company and a sports book that just restructured their deal between PointsBet and NBC. Yep. Just talk a little bit about those numbers.
Well, I think the stock prices themselves will tell you what investors have thought about the rather aggressive level of customer acquisition and marketing spending that went on, let's say, a year ago. And I think we're starting to see signs that the companies are at least beginning to approach a discussion about reaching positive EBITDA this year or going into next year. And one of the interesting side notes, because we mentioned Massachusetts, was there were 15 spots for mobile operators created in that state, of which about a half dozen basically are unclaimed, and you had PointsBet and Bet365 basically kind of pulling back from that market, which I think was probably the way they framed it, a logical move in terms of really going after high-value clients and getting their good return on investment. But it'll be interesting to see what happens both with media, betting relationships, and with promotional costs if we start to see a somewhat thinned-out playing field. Yeah. If companies voluntarily say, we're going to take a step back from a market like Massachusetts, and it raises the question of will we see that happening in other established states, and which may be another way for the market to. Eventually what happens is the big will get even bigger.
Yes.
FanDuel and DraftKings, and there's a potential in that sense for customer acquisition costs to come down. And then you've got the media companies maybe trying to find opportunities in a more rationalized online sports betting space.
Right, right. So in Massachusetts, Cosmina, you all are approaching it from, you're saying, you're trying to sell advertising, and then you're also trying to sell customers to the sports books. How are you all approaching the content space?
Yeah.
What does that look like? And maybe going back to Tomer is what are people looking for? What do you think, or what are you all hearing from the existing viewers of NESN? How are you looking to grow that and maybe grow this sports betting content?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that, again, we approach the space a little bit different than maybe some of the other players. We specifically built out sports betting analysts that were separate from, our in-game play. We're still trying to be really mindful of introducing this audience to the MLB and NHL audiences because they haven't seen it before, right? So we've done some conditioning, we've done some predictive gaming and things like that to get them ready for this, but there's lots of restrictions still from a league level as to how much we can really input into the actual bread and butter, right? Yeah. So I think things like NESNbets.com, our sports betting shows, that's really allowed us to play a little bit in the digital space to say, what are people interacting with? What are they engaging with? What's working? What isn't? And we've had success in doing that. But yeah, I think that it's a turning point because the fact that two major sports operators did not come into Massachusetts, that's predicted to be the third highest city in sports betting in the country, that really has to give everybody a little bit of pause. I think NBC was smart in taking a step back and saying, how do we restructure this for the long term? But I do think that the content piece is still something that no one's quite figured out. Look at FanDuel TV. I still think that they're trying to VSiN with, DraftKings. They're still trying to figure this piece out, and I do think that media companies could potentially be successful in doing this, especially given our relationships with the teams. But we've got to be smart about it, and we have to be willing to test things and pivot quickly. And in full candor, media companies aren't great at pivoting quickly.
Not the most nimble.
Yeah, not the most nimble. But yeah, so if we're open to it, the sports operators will show us the way.
Yeah.
But we have to be open to it.
And I think Fox learned this, Brian and I were talking about this earlier, Fox learned this, that just because I have millions of eyeballs watching sports does not mean that I own them as a sports bettor.
Correct.
That conversion and that customer journey that Optimove do so well at managing is not just a given, and certainly it hasn't played out necessarily in their market share.
And you actually had a great line when we first met, Dan. You said you have to use a scalpel, not a spoon.
Yeah.
And that always really stuck with me. You have to know so much about this audience that you can segment them in a way where they want to engage with you. You can't do it like your autos. It's not the same.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit, Reid, about content that you all are. You've got 25 million, people that you engage with. What do they want? What are they looking for? From a Betsperts perspective.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think it varies by season, it varies by sport, it varies by state, in region of the country, honestly, and what bettors and fantasy players and props and same game parlays and all that, what everyone is looking for. I think the industry majority of the industry thinks that gamblers are much more sophisticated than they actually are, in America at least. And I think we've learned that through same game parlays that we might not be here stateside.
People don't care about price.
I don't think price shopping is really relevant in the market currently, right? So how are you engaging to make it entertaining? And I think that's really the way to go about it, and it's how you retain your customers and how people come back to you. And I think as we look forward, we're talking about LTV for a bit. I think Ohio is a really good example of this. Ohio at launch in pre-reg, you're clearly just trying to get as many people as you possibly can.
Yes.
The Super Bowl is wonderful for that, March Madness, all that. How are you re-engaging people around Ohio in football? How do you determine an LTV before you have a first Ohio State football season, and then they go through 3 operators with the best deal, and they have to finally redeposit somewhere? So what point are they at in their journey? What content are they looking for?
Yes.
And make it easy, make it quick for the most part. And if it's going to be premium, the American market doesn't really mind paying for subscriptions if they believe in the product. I think you'll also see in the next 5-10 years for stickiness and retention, I think you'll see subscription products and platforms and opportunities with operators as well, because if you're paying that way, maybe you get some sort of benefit and some credits or things along those lines, depending on the legal side of it. But when you have that, people are going to keep playing in your ecosystem. If you pay for a service, you're going to keep going back to it, even if you get the benefit, or you might give the benefit right back.
Right.
I think that's something that's not really being talked about a lot right now.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about data, Tomer. Just help us, like, what are sports books, media companies like? What are good data strategies out there? What are they looking for? Everything that we have talked about really is around understanding the customer, but you cannot understand the customer if you're not tracking various elements either on your media platform or on your sports book. Just take us through the importance of that and some of the things that you all are working on in the U.S.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, what I find is that actually data exists, as in operators are pretty good at collecting data. The problem is, what do you do with this data?
Actionable data.
How do you make it actionable? And I think even more so, how do you make it scalable, right?
Yes.
So when you think about turning data into actions, turning data into insights, I think that's where we see the difference between different operators.
Yes.
And funny enough, what I actually see is that a lot of the bigger operators actually sometimes they struggle with legacy systems that they use.
Sure.
And you'll find this bunch of silos and data models sit one on top of the other, and then it doesn't really work together.
Yes.
Versus some of the newer ones that are coming up.
Yes.
And are building themselves from the beginning, from the ground up to the newest technology. And they're more nimble, right? So
and should media companies? I mean, you just mentioned all of that for sports books, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Is there a case to be made that media companies should probably be doing the exact same thing?
Yeah, that's. It's about know your customer. Who's your client, right? You wanna.
Correct.
And I think, look, this goes to a much bigger story of the death of the third-party cookie, and
Right.
There's we can have another panel about that, right?
Right.
So that's
Yes.
that's another driver, I think.
That's a great title, actually.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we talk about knowing your customer and the different cycles. I'd be curious, I know we have stats on it all, besides regional teams and regional sports interests, do we know yet the major difference between a New Jersey sports bettor and an Ohio sports bettor? Does that exist? Is it different than an English sports bettor in a newer, more mature market in Europe? Is there a difference in the American market by state?
I can tell you that parlays were 40% of GGR in 2019 in New Jersey, and now it's 60%. Yep. So I think there was a thesis out there that the states would get more sophisticated. I think we're seeing less sophistication, at least in the numbers. The argument that everybody would say is, yes, I understand that some of those players that are more sophisticated are probably getting their accounts closed. I understand that, but the numbers that are coming out of these states are giving some indication on what's happening. To Omer's point and maybe to yours, it's so important for everybody to collect the data So get that right first. Make it actionable. Hopefully, you're thinking about what you're going to do with it afterwards. But at least start to collect it, and so that you can do something with it, so that you can figure out personalization, localization. I venture to say I see a lot of localization in my own business across the United States. We just have 3 minutes left, so I'm just going to ask one real quick question, and it's really around the education element. Reid, you talked a little bit about it. Just maybe. Are American bettors sophisticated? And how important is trust? You were talking about KYC in 40 seconds or less, Tomer. I can tell you for certain that the level of scrutiny that it takes in order for me to sign up and give my social security number and deposit money, that funnel is a challenge for every operator out there. But do people understand sports betting? Do they understand what -110 means? Reid.
Me?
Yeah.
No, most of them don't. You're having a beer, watching a game, or you see a same game parlay from your favorite influencer, or whatever it is.
Yes.
It's an entertainment business, and if they understood it, in New Jersey, the mature market, the parlays wouldn't keep going up.
Yeah.
But I think if it's responsibly presented as entertainment,
yes,
I think people will trust you and join you on the journey. So if you're going to be a sharp bettor or try and be a sharp bettor, I think the education process takes longer than people anticipate, because how do you not make the mistakes when you're late night live betting or something along those lines, right? So for me, I think that it's an entertainment side. If you're seeking deeper information or deeper analytics, you can go find it. If you don't have inside information, it's tough to do. Yeah. But realistically, I think most people are doing it for fun and hopefully responsibly. But if you cater it to that, they'll support you and you support them back.
And Cosmina, is that something that NESN is looking at? Educating,
I mean,
help everybody through this process,
yeah,
please.
for sure. But I've been really surprised, as somebody who hasn't been in the gaming, sports betting industry for very long, just the lack of education and really understanding, which is why I agree with you, like the entertainment piece and the responsibility that we hold as a media company to really educate people, make sure they're doing it for fun, make sure they're educated in their bets. It is a big one. So again, we haven't had mobile betting live, or 3 days away. Right. But we have been educating. We've been running messaging with the AGA, really getting people to understand what they're about to participate in. Yes. And we feel a deep responsibility for that.
And Brian, do you see that maybe also on maybe the capital markets, just people maybe taking a relook at the American sports bettor?
I think so. I mean,
how different is that than certainly the European?
I'd say two things. First, to Reid's point, if you're not seeing that level of player sophistication in New Jersey today, you're probably not going to see it in a new state like Massachusetts in 2 or 3 years. It's almost the canary in the coal mine, because it went first. The second thing I'll say is investors will have very little tolerance for any kind of deferral of that path to profitability, meaning that if this sort of promise of reaching positive EBITDA later this year, going to next year, if that doesn't manifest itself in the numbers, then you're going to see a virtual revolt in terms of the stock price behavior.
Right on. Awesome. Well, you know what? That wraps up our panel. Can we just get a round of applause to the panelists? Good.